It's okay to be excited for Deuce Knight.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zach Blackerby, and thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. Joining me as he does every single Monday, it is the Lindsey Crosby. You can find all of his Auburn stuff over at thebarnauburn.com. Later in the show, we're going to be joined by Chris Gordy, host of Locked On SEC. Who should be number one in college basketball? That discussion coming up, as well as what do we want to see from the quarterbacks specifically this spring. But Lindsey, you and I talked to some folks, similar folks over the course of the weekend. There is a lot of energy and excitement from folks within the program about Deuce Knight. It sounds like he's come in early enrolled, obviously, but he's done everything the right way. And just the way that folks that I hear from talk about Deuce Knight, it does seem like he's getting after it perhaps a little bit more than maybe the average early enrollee.
Yeah, I mean, some of the things we've seen, it's the football stuff and the non-football stuff, right?
Yeah, right.
Was listed at 208. I think in like all the recruiting profiles, Auburn's got him at 210 on the roster. Reportedly, he's put on some good weight already, that SEC weight room kind of thing. But then just all of the football stuff that they're trying to do, like everything that we heard is the QB specific stuff they're working on, the different drills, all the different things like that. He's showing them everything that they want to see and that he needs to show. And am I a little bit off base if I say there legitimately could be a legit quarterback competition in spring and in fall? Like, obviously, Jackson Arnold's the favorite, but there is a world where Deuce Knight just looks fantastic and gets into the conversation about playing time.
I don't think I agree with that. I don't think there's a quarterback battle for QB1. I do think there's a QB battle for QB2/QB3. How far can, Deuce get before Ashton Daniels gets here? Because obviously Ashton Daniels, the Stanford QB, not going to be here this spring. So take that for what it's worth. But I just can't see a world where Jackson Arnold, barring injury, doesn't start against Baylor. Now, the leash could be shorter if Deuce Knight is incredible. Nice. But I just don't think that that's a world where Deuce Knight can fight and win QB1. And I don't even know if that's about Deuce. I just think it's about the commitment that they made to Jackson Arnold.
Right. And it is, I think, a little far-fetched. I do think the big takeaway, though, is from the people that we've talked to, I feel a little bit better about if you had to put Deuce Knight on the field. They feel really confident he's doing all the QB stuff that they're wanting to see, that they're working on, and he's progressing like a 5-star should, right? Like that's kind of the way that this is going. And I'm excited because I feel like we haven't had that dynamic freshman quarterback who came in and looked like he belonged, even maybe necessarily in practice. Bo. So you go back to Bo. Yeah.
Bo next.
Because all of the conversations were about like Walker White looked like a true freshman in practice. Holden Garner looked like a true freshman in practice.
Yeah.
Deuce Knight doesn't, on some of the early work they're doing, non-field, like non-full team stuff, doesn't look like a freshman would look when thrown into this world of college football. And that's exciting.
Yeah, and this lines up with what Hugh Freeze told us when he was down in Mobile checking out, the future pros, his former guys, down at the Senior Bowl. He was asked about Deuce Knight, and one of the words he says, and I think this is a direct quote, is he's not waiting to be great. Meaning, of course, he's going out and he's asking the questions, he's seeking the information, he's spending time in the playbook. He's not waiting to be great. He's going to get it now. And he's good enough and talented enough to go out and get it now. I love the talk about him gaining weight. I think, you look at what he did at the high school ranks and even just kind of seeing him on the visits here at Auburn. I mean, he was a skinny guy. And this is a dude who, I would love to be close to 220 by the time it's his time to start at Auburn, whenever Jackson Arnold was done. So I love that that's part of this narrative so early on, And we assume he's so athletic. You don't want him to gain weight and lose any of that explosiveness or athletic ability. But if he can keep it and play at 220 or so, like, he's going to take hits. So you want him to be thick. You want him to kind of be able to withstand some hits from SEC defenses and has some longevity for sure. But I don't know. Just everything I'm hearing about Deuce Knight gets me more and more excited about the future Deuce Knight era of Auburn football, which is coming. It will be here at some point. You got to think.
Yeah, I think the weight gain thing is definitely just being able to make it through the season, right? I mean, if you're the starter every game now with the new schedule, you could be playing up to like 16 games, and you have to be able to take the hits. You have to be able to, get battered sometimes and be able to get back up, and just having that little bit of extra weight on the frame, especially a frame like his that can add a lot of weight. In baseball, we call that projectability. Like, he's got a projectable frame where he can add good weight and it not be a detriment to his game. Just makes him, if nothing else, more resilient. But you have to, as you add that strength, it can also manifest in other ways. Maybe he gets a little bit better of a deep ball, things like that. But it's mainly an injury thing. You just want him to be able to take a hit and get back up.
All the physical aspects of Deuce Knight, we assumed would happen. Like, we assumed whether it was at Auburn or Notre Dame or Ole Miss, wherever all the places it was possible he end up, you assumed he was going to put on the weight because he's got the frame for it. Like, he's going to be able to fill that out easily. I think that's just a natural progression of him as an athlete. The biggest thing I think holding Deuce Knight back as far as, him being great, it wasn't the physical aspect. It was all the mental aspect. I mean, you could be the best athlete on the field at the high school level. I don't care what division. If you're special enough from a talent standpoint, you can excel. And that's what Deuce Knight did. I'm not saying he wasn't a bad quarterback and didn't go through progressions or anything like that. I'm just saying you can do that. But the biggest, I don't even want to say concern, but it's like, hey, if you told me Deuce Knight doesn't pan out, I would have said it was, just understanding how to play quarterback at the next level. Did he transition quick enough or efficiently enough? But it sounds like he's doing everything he can to make sure he's ready as soon as possible, which is exactly the right mentality that you want to have. And so, to me, Auburn fans should hear all this and say, yes, that's exciting, while also adjusting expectations to say, I don't think, and I'm glad you brought this up earlier, but I don't think there's a shot that he overtakes Jackson Arnold in the pecking order this offseason.
Yeah. Again, barring injury. And
barring injury. Sure.
Yeah. The big thing for Deuce, it felt like when you watched him in high school is, and a lot of guys do this at that level, but it felt like he was just the best athlete on the field and he could out athlete everybody. And as you get higher and higher in organized football, you have to be able to better play in the structure of the offense, in rhythm. He making reads, yes, but sometimes you got to get to your third or your fourth and things like that. And so, not something that a lot of high schoolers do, not something a lot of college kids do, but it did feel like that was the big thing. So hearing that he's also excelling in all the QB stuff, makes me feel good. And like you said, kind of dovetails with what Hugh said down in Mobile, which, by the way, the best coverage of the Senior Bowl that I found from anybody, it's Locked On Auburn. Zach Lockerbie and Daryl Dapprich. It was awesome. So good.
Thank
stuff.
you, my
such,
God.
such good
Thank
stuff.
you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Of course.
All right. What should we expect specifically from these quarterbacks this spring? That's the big question. And we're jumping into it next, right here on Locked On Auburn. Today's show brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Lindsay, can you imagine wagering anywhere other than with our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook?
Matter of fact, not only can I not imagine it, I have not done it. We were recording this before the big game.
Sure.
And
you could say Super Bowl for this read. They're the official partners of Super Bowl 59.
Look at that.
Yes.
There's no way. Can you imagine having a podcast that did not get the official sponsor of Super Bowl? No, not me.
No. FanDuel doesn't play. And obviously now with football behind us, as you guys hear this, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on the action other than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And hey, there's some college football futures already in there. Auburn, a 1.5-point favorite against Baylor in the season opener. If you feel good about that one way or the other, go ahead and jump. I got a feeling that line will move before now and the tip. So if you feel good about that, go ahead and hop on there.
It's not the tip, but okay. If Walker White's the starter
Kick,
for
thank you.
for Baylor, it's definitely going to go from like 1.5 for Auburn to like 4 or 5.5, just because of the vibes, the anti-Walker vibes that are there now.
The vibes. All right.
Yeah.
Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Make every moment more with FanDuel. Thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. Lindsay, the expectations for the quarterbacks, I mean, my expectations for Deuce Knight did go up a little bit. The more I hear about him, the more I'm saying, okay, like he's going to get so many reps in spring with Ashton Daniels not being here. And if I had to predict the way too early depth chart for Auburn's pecking order going into the season, I think Deuce will play the second amount of snaps at quarterback for Auburn behind Jackson Arnold. I think Deuce Knight plays more snaps this upcoming season than Ashton Daniels does, based on what I'm expecting out of spring, and that's a strong spring for Deuce Knight.
Being here for spring is a big deal, right? And I feel like I say this every time we talk about the passing game, but so much of passing in general, but especially this Hugh Freeze offense, is the quarterback and the wide receiver having the chemistry and being on the same page and knowing this is how we're going to adjust to this coverage. And the fact that Deuce is going to be here all spring and gets to learn, how does Cam Coleman like to run this route? How does Eric Singleton like to approach this coverage, is going to leave him better prepared to take over that backup spot than a guy like an Ashton Daniels who won't be here until later. Obviously, Daniels has the experience of having done it in college football, but it's still definitely like, I'm looking forward to, like, there's things for each guy I'm looking forward to, but for Deuce specifically, it's just getting that time with those players, with the wide receivers who are currently here and understanding what they do and finding his guy. There's always a guy that this quarterback just meshes really well with, and they end up producing with that guy whenever they're put in those situations. That's who they look for.
Yeah, I like that point. And I do think Ashton Daniels will have a role. And I wanted to be careful with what I said a second ago, saying Deuce Knight will have more snaps than Ashton Daniels. I do think, especially early in the season, if something were to happen with Jackson Arnold, I think Ashton Daniels will go in next. But I think there's different versions of like what the backup quarterback actually is. I mean, we saw that a little bit last year. I mean, towards the end of the season when it kind of felt like, okay, we need to see what Walker White has. I mean, Walker was the backup quarterback in that game, not Hank. But we all saw Peyton get pulled and Hank be the starter, earlier in the season. So I do think there's different versions of what the backup quarterback is in that specific time. I don't think in like a garbage time situation where you want to get more reps to guys, I don't think it helps Auburn to give snaps to Ashton Daniels over Deuce Knight. Now, but if it's an emergency situation and you're in the game, you're down 3 or you're up 3 or whatever, and it's like, especially early in the season, and you need the best case or the best chance for you to win, that probably is Ashton Daniels until a certain point, and the coaches will make that call. I mean, maybe, hopefully they don't have to, but
right.
When it comes to just awarding game snaps, it doesn't help you to play Ashton Daniels. You need to play Deuce Knight as much as possible for the future of this program. I think it'll help with recruiting. It'll help with Deuce Knight's development. And so to me, like Ashton Daniels may be the backup quarterback. He may be QB2, but I think Deuce will play more than Ashton Daniels this season.
Yeah, and it's very much a QB2, as in if your starter is unavailable, Daniels is in the game. But if it's a blowout, and it sounds like you're expecting more blowout situations than you are Ashton Daniels has to get pulled from a game due to injury or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I think that makes sense where we
or Jackson Arnold having to get pulled.
I'm sorry, Arnold. We can pull a DAP and say two things are true at once. Like Ashton Daniels is probably going to be the backup officially, but Deuce Knight will play more because he will get all of the garbage time. If we're smart, he'll get all the garbage time snaps to get that little bit of development and just get a little more prepared for when he does have to take over. Two things can be true at once. Shout out.
Yeah. Shout out to Dap. Dap always living on this show, and we are super pumped about that. So yeah, all right, we're in agreement there. What do you think? Down below, let us know in the comments, or if you're listening on audio, let us know on socials or over at thebarnauburn.com. Coming up, I joined Locked On SEC, Chris Gordy today, and I'm going to put that segment up in just a second. We discuss, debate, who should be number one in college basketball when the poll drops later today. Should it be the Auburn Tigers or should it be Alabama? Fascinating. I can't believe this is the world that we live in, that those are going to probably be 1 and 2 when the poll drops later today. In the meantime, Lindsay, before we jump into that, how can people check out everything that you've got going on?
I'm on Twitter at Crosley Baseball. It's kind of the hub for everything. We've got obviously the Atlanta Braves stuff, bravestoday.com, podcast, and a newsletter. But the Barn Auburn is where all of the baseball nugs go, and the Barn Baseball Show. Me, Brad Law, and Sonny DeShera every single week talking ball. It's so much fun. I've wanted to do this for a couple seasons now. We got it worked out, and the Thick King is surprisingly good on the mic.
Oh, it's not surprising. It's not surprising at all.
It's not surprising.
I do think he's got media in his future if he wants to go that route. I think that'll be available to him for sure. So yeah, be sure to check out the Barn Baseball Pod. It's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. All right, my conversation with Chris Gordy next. Who should be number one?
Two most intriguing games of the weekend. Number 3, Alabama survives a scare from an improving Arkansas team winning on the road in Fayetteville. The Tide get the 85-81 win. And number 6, Florida went on the road and got one of the biggest wins of the year, beating number 1 Auburn at Neville Arena 90-81. And with that, number 2 Duke also fell at Clemson. So the big question now, who should be number 1 in the polls? Our buddy Zach Blackerby, he hosts Locked On Auburn. He joins us. And Zach, go ahead, man. Let's make a case. Why should Auburn stay at number 1 in the polls?
Yeah, I thought you were going to ask me who should be number 1, Auburn or Alabama. It's like, wonder what I'm going to say. I still think, regardless of Auburn's loss, and Auburn had a terrible showing against Florida, and Florida's a good team. I don't want to take anything away from Florida. They should be ranked top 5. They are a top 5 team in college basketball. But Auburn still has the best resume in college basketball. The most quad 1 wins by a considerable margin, the toughest schedule in college basketball, and they sit still atop the country, in my opinion. With that 20-2 record, and your 2 losses are Duke, who would have been number 1 later today if they had taken care of business at Clemson. That didn't happen. And then, obviously, Florida. 2 elite teams, 2 teams that are definitely contenders to make the Elite Eight in the Final Four, and heck, even potentially a national championship. So Auburn has the most quality wins of any team in college basketball. Then their 2 losses, I think, are extremely excusable. Auburn still has the best resume in college basketball. They're number 1 in KenPom. So we'll see. We'll see how the voters. It seems to change, Gordy, from week to week what the criteria is for some of these voters, as well as the brand associated with it. I think Duke gets more of a pass than other schools. I think Kansas gets a pass more than other schools. Kentucky gets a pass more than other schools. We'll see how Auburn and Alabama are treated when polls drop later today.
Yeah, just for the resumes, you got 21-2 Auburn, who's now 9-1 in the SEC. They take their first conference loss. 20-3 Duke, who is 12-1 in the ACC. They take their first loss in conference. And Alabama is 20-3, so they got the one additional non-conference loss, but they're an identical 9-1 in the SEC. And these two have not played head-to-head yet. So again, it's kind of pick your flavor, but like. Again, I saw a lot of Auburn and Alabama fans the last 24 hours going at each other, and there were a lot of Auburn fans saying, look, forget living in the moment of what just happened. Take that, but then take a step back and let's look at the whole year. And Auburn consistently has been the best team in the country.
Yeah, and some pollsters are going to vote differently than others. Some are going to be in the moment, and that's fine, and some aren't. Some of them just copy KenPom, which I guess is fine. Whatever. Do you need a vote if you're just going to copy KenPom? I don't know, but that's a conversation for another day. The beauty of all of this, Gordy, is they're going to get to hash this out on the court in a week. I mean, that's the beauty of all of this. And one of the teams is probably going to be number 1, and the other one's probably going to be number 2 in Tuscaloosa. And just the fact that there's a strong argument, a very strong argument for both of these teams, and they get to play this Saturday in Tuscaloosa. Oh, I mean, this is a major win for college basketball. It's a major win for the SEC. And there is a developing major sense of pride throughout the state of Alabama right now. I mean, heck, I don't think either fan base is happy with how their football season's just turned out. So all the focus, all the pride turns to basketball. And these two teams get to play twice. Obviously, they play Saturday, and then they play the last game of the regular season, Gordy. And I said it throughout the last few weeks. The winner of that game that might be the SEC championship game when it's all said and done, which is electric as it could possibly get.
Yeah, it's going to be incredible. And, look, as we look kind of ahead, I want to look back really quick, but give me a quick primer on Saturday. What went wrong for Auburn? It kind of felt like missed free throws kind of killed them.
Yeah, missed free throws. Florida played a great game. Once again, like, it's easy to come out and say Auburn didn't play their best game, which is true, but also like Florida lived up to the moment. I mean, this was a number 1 versus number 6 matchup, and Florida said, hey, we want this more. We don't care that we're in Neville. We don't care, how good Auburn is historically. We want this. And they wanted it more. I don't think there's any question about it. I mean, Janai Broome didn't look like the player of the year that he has looked in pretty much every game so far this year, and his stats were still fine. He made a 3 late that really made his stats look a lot better than they actually were, in my opinion. But even like the camera was zooming in on him on the sideline, it just didn't seem like he wanted to be there. And you still had guys like Miles Kelly. He scored over 20. I mean, he was electric, but it didn't feel right. And how much of that was Auburn? How much of that is what Florida did? Florida was physical. They made threes. They did everything that you're supposed to do in a big game, and Auburn didn't.
Yeah, and Florida's a top team too. I mean, so you have to tip your cap and say, it's a good loss if you're going to have a loss, but it was.
There's like two sides of the coin. I was talking about this with Daryl Dapprich. He and I go live together on Locked On Auburn after every Auburn basketball game, if y'all are interested in that. But we were kind of watching the last few minutes of the game before we went live, and it's like there's two sides of this coin. Like, if you're going to lose a game, like from a resume standpoint, this one doesn't look bad. I mean, your 2 losses are Duke and Florida. But on the other side of it is like, these are the games you want to win. These are the games you want to win. You don't get to host too many top 10 matchups at home. Auburn got to do that against Tennessee a few weeks ago, and they won in a brutal game. And then they lost to Florida. So they'll get to host another top 10 matchup, we all assume, later this year when Alabama comes to Auburn. So it's just, you don't get that opportunity too often. So while it's like, this is an okay one to lose, if you're going to lose one from a resume standpoint, you still would much rather add another quality win to your resume.
Yeah, and if you're Auburn, what you want to avoid also is a slide. Okay, you take your first SEC loss, you bounce back and you're okay. But this week, Zach, you got to go to Vandy.
Tricky. That's a tricky opponent now.
They just beat Texas. They beat Kentucky a week ago. And then an epic game, like we said, at Coleman Coliseum. I mean, if you don't take care of business at Vandy, you could suddenly be staring down the hole of a 3-game losing streak.
100%. And it's going to be a little tough to not look ahead to Alabama because there's so much pressure on both of these teams. It's going to be easy to not look at Vandy. So, well, you're absolutely right, Gordy. You can't let this turn into a 3-game losing streak. You've got to find a way to win in Nashville on Tuesday. And so we'll definitely see what Bruce Pearl and these Tigers have in store for the Commodores later this week.
And you mentioned, after this trip to Coleman, you finished the regular season at Neville Arena hosting Alabama. And by the way, Auburn's final 4 games of the regular season are home for Ole Miss, at Kentucky, at A&M, home for Bama. All currently top 25 opponents.
Brutal, yeah.
So I ask you this in closing, Zach, will Auburn win the SEC?
Yes. I think Auburn wins the SEC, and I think they split with Bama. I think Auburn loses in Tuscaloosa, and then I think they win against Alabama at Neville, and that game acts as the regular season SEC championship.
It's going to be a lot of fun, man. It's overall, how much have you enjoyed this season of SEC basketball so far? I mean,
it's been incredible.
We're starting to get a little bit of a separation on who's the contenders and who's the pretenders, but I think way more contenders than maybe we even thought at the start of the year.
Yeah, and going into the weekend, I mean, there was a major log jam of kind of that second tier. Like, you had Auburn, you had Bama 1 game back. Now they're obviously tied, but then you had this log jam of teams with 6 wins, and they were all just so good. And so Saturday, we talked about this last week on Locked on Auburn, that Saturday would kind of be, I think it would tell us who a lot of teams are. And I don't know if it actually did in hindsight now, but we'll see. We'll see obviously more as the season goes on. But it's been so fun, Gordy. And it's the best the SEC's ever been, and to cover a team and pull for a team that has been the best in college basketball every step of the way up to this point. It's been super fun. And Janai Broom, I mean, just one of the most pleasant surprises in all of my sports fandom ever. So yeah, it's been a blast.
If you could trade him for Cooper Flag, would you?
No.
Okay.
No. This isn't the NBA.
I know. We're for voting best player in college basketball, I have to ask, would you swap them? So
always a pleasure to chat with Chris Gordy. Be sure to check out his show, Locked on SEC, available wherever you're watching this show. Just type in Locked on SEC. You'll find it. Thank you to Gordy. Thank you to Lindsay. Thank you to you once again for making Locked on Auburn your first listen every single day. Please like the show. Please subscribe, whether you're watching on YouTube or on audio. It helps the channel out a ton. Leave a review if you're listening as well. That'd be awesome. Gosh, that'd be great. We'll see you next time. This has been Locked on Auburn.